In this show, On Good Soil, we're going to explore why so many Catholic families are trying to find their way back to farming and homesteading and living a life on the land. We're going to go and visit them and ask them specifically, why is their faith inspiring them to live this life so different from how so many live in the modern world? So I'm here with Jim Curley. Jim, you have been, for us, a mentor and a friend. Mentor first. Friendship came later, and the mentoring was we were raising our first pigs, and they started out as piglets, and then they turned into monsters. And we didn't know what to do from there, and you helped us slaughter them. I think it was in the middle of summer. It was the worst time to do it. You came up there, you showed us how. But since then, we've I don't know how many times you've been up. It's been a part of our life to have, as my kids call Mr. Curley days when you come around. So how did the Curleys get to the land?
Well, I think before Lori and I were even married, we talked about, sort of in a romantic sense, we'd like to have a small place out in the country and do stuff, and I was going to make little wooden toys, and we were going to grow our food and stuff like that. And but as we got married, started having kids, and things got in the way of that. But at the same time, I grew more, and our discussions grew more about that might be important to move out here because of the kind of life that we could give our children, and what we wanted to give our children versus what we were giving them now.
You had a good job. What was it that was, about having kids what was dissatisfying?
I felt that here I am, I come home, it's like I throw the money on the table and everybody devours it, I mean, my wife goes shopping because we need the food, but the kids had no sense of where everything they had was coming from. And we very seldom worked together. Okay, so once a year we rake leaves together and things like that. So we weren't working and doing things together that really mattered. And I had a sense that just from experience with my boys, like when I take them backpacking or other things, that they really wanted to do things that mattered. That little boys really want to be little men, and they want to have this, they want to do things that men do. Yet I had no way to give them that, I worked in front of a computer all day, and I had some good vacation times, and when I had those, we tried to do things together. It really wasn't the same. I didn't feel like they were going to grow the way they should.
A lot of people charge homesteaders as wanting to run away from something, wanting to run away from society or escape something, when usually the opposite is actually true. One of the things that they're trying to do is actually run back towards what is real. If our world could be described today as anything, it could be hyper-artificial. We are surrounded by what is artificial constantly, from the smells that surround us, from the temperature in the room, from the lights being on whenever we want them, from the lights being off whenever we want them, from the amusement, the entertainment, everything that we're surrounded by is artificial. Something is artificial when it is made by man. So that means it's not necessarily bad because it's artificial. When we say the word artificial, we might think someone is being duplicitous or someone is being counterfeit, but that's not necessarily true. Artificial simply means that it is an artifact, which has the same root word of man, which we might add also the word art has the same root, which is to be made by man. And that's actually fine. God placed us in creation, and we are there to work to cultivate the world that He created. And when we do that, we naturally make things that are of our own creation. Now, they don't exist in isolation as if man just has these things, that he is like God in being a creator, but we are co-creators and we co-create things. We make things that are artificial. In fact, Romano Guardini, the great priest and theologian, he actually described human culture, that what is happening when we create culture, the way culture is created, is that we are making things and sort of pulling them from nature into our use, which becomes something different than the way these things exist naturally. We're here, Craig DeFaro's homestead, also your business.
Yes.
It's new, right? So you're starting a butcher shop. Tell me how you went from working for a large bank to now you're homesteading.
Yeah.
Or trying to homestead.
It wasn't an overnight decision. It happened over time. In probably very early on in my wife and I's marriage, somewhere 7 or 8 years ago, we just started to feel some sense that the family order we experienced in the city was not the ideal for us. That me leaving the home every day for 8, 10, 12 hours was not a long-term family lifestyle that we wanted. And so in the city, that started to manifest itself in me finding more domestic pursuits. So even though I was working outside of the home, instead of having the many of the typical hobbies or lifestyle decisions in the city where I was then away from the home for all of my hobby time or time away from work, we started doing things like backyard gardening and getting chickens, getting bees. And
how does being a Catholic father, what did that have to do with, the desire to homestead it? Because you talked about the order of our home, as if there was something that you wanted to order your life. Because mostly you're describing your work, right? I was working away from the home. I wanted to work at the home.
As I started to think more about this intentionally, some of it was wrapped up in my work in financial services and coming to grips with, well, as a Catholic, I should have some view about how money should be managed. I can't just accept the standard certified financial planner advice that I want to give to people in this job. I need to learn what the church teaches, and I need to then apply that to my life. And that was something that then fit very naturally into the order of the home and homesteading, because I started to recognize that as a father, we often use the term of breadwinner, and being the breadwinner. And in contemporary times, that just means going out and making money and bringing money home so you can buy things for the family. But I started to realize that wasn't enough, that it wasn't enough for me to just leave the home, bring back money so I could buy food and buy things and buy experiences for my family. Instead, they needed me, and that's actually more challenging than leaving the home and bringing back money, to stay closer to home and give more of yourself, to bring more of that natural family order, to be present with my children in ways that can be frustrating, like when you're trying to plant a row of corn and they're coming behind you and picking corn back out, or picking all your transplants out of the ground. Like to be with them, work with them, to have an order of life that wasn't just mine. I do this every day, but that we together as a family are going to grow in virtue and holiness, not just as individuals, but as a unit.
Why not just letters?
So humans, obviously, we have bodies, we have souls. Our bodies have very similar needs, in fact, the exact same in many ways, as the beasts, as the creatures of the world. But we also have souls. So a lot of things that we do, they also do with us. Eating, sleeping, those sorts of things. However, we as humans, when we bring them into our world, they become what we call culture. The word culture has as the root of the word cult, which means to worship. To worship God and to work the soil in man becomes the same thing. We are actually stuck in the middle in this act that we have a soul, so we have our minds and our hearts and even our eyes to heaven. But we also have bodies, so by necessity, We turn downward to the soil like the animals, and from the earth bring forth what we need to feed the body. And these things in man work in unison, work in harmony.
Right of our property line. And this is sand out here, like the ocean used to come this far in. And the land is sand, and there's no nutrients in it. And we couldn't grow anything. Matter of fact, our next door neighbor came over and said, you can't grow anything on your land. I have a garden plot if you want to plant a garden on my land, because he saw me tilling up a garden. And I said, no thanks, but then we couldn't grow anything. It was 5 years before we could grow broccoli. So what we did is we got animals and put them here, and then moved them there and planted here the next season. And laid manure down. Cows are best. I don't know, they go the most. But just always moving. And if you tour here now, you can see evidence of it. There's the pen the cows were in 3 weeks ago, and now here's the pen that the steer is in today. And the pigs also, we're constantly moving them to different locations so we can give fertility to the land.
Everything that we have comes from the earth. The priest and theologian Romano Guardini put it this way. He said, in older Italian houses, especially in rural areas, you will always find the open hearth. We have here something that is bound up with the deepest roots of human existence, seizing open fire and putting the flame to use to warm us. Mind and spirit at work here, nature is put to human use, and an element of human existence is achieved. There is a payment and some remoteness from nature, to be sure. I am aware of the roar of a fire and the primitive power of uncontrolled flames. Here we have a softening and thinning out and distancing. That is the cost of culture. But nature is still close at hand. This is human living. With some exaggeration, we might say that being human means lighting a fire at a protected spot so that it may give light and heat. What Guardini is telling us is that there is in human culture a remoteness in what it becomes artificial. A fire does not naturally produce itself in a hearth. All right, Joel, we've been walking around your farm, seeing everything you're doing. When I describe you, I call you the wild man. We didn't get to see your furs and all your I don't know, meads and wines and everything. But how long ago did you start all this? Because we went on Craig Tafaro's farm. He had just got started. So his trees were this tall. Yeah. Yours are above our heads now. So when did all this start?
For this particular farm, we started 8 years ago. Okay. And we've been farming though before that, like we started on 0.3 acres, you know, in Gastonia. Okay. And then we moved out to the 30 acres and 35, now 85. Expanding that out.
So tell me, why were you, what was compelling you to do even on your 0.3 acres? I remember you showing me pictures. You had strawberries and other things.
It was this concept that with homesteading, that it can be done on any kind of acreage. It doesn't mean you can do it on a balcony if you need to. So that's one of the biggest things that, but in terms of compelling us to do it at that point, it was still that draw to the land. Even if we couldn't be there at that point to the bigger acreage, we knew we could start somewhere, and that's where.
So you're saying we? Is that you and your wife?
Me and my wife, yeah, my wife and I, and we, you know, it's like G.K. Chesterton says, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. That's right. Right. So it's kind of like you got to start somewhere, and fail small, you know, to begin those lessons rather than failing big later.
But you have farming in your background.
Yes.
You grew up farming. Mm-hmm. Your father passed away. Yeah. You got married. I don't know the timeline of all that, but was farming sort of something that you knew you wanted to share with your family? Or homesteading, was that something you wanted to share with your family?
Yes.
You're figuring out how to do that. Was there a time where that was dormant? And you weren't doing that? Did you, I'm trying to remember, I actually don't know what the timeline is.
Yes. Well, so kind of the story, the background, it's dynamic, right? It was never like a straight line. God kind of writes straight with crooked lines, so to speak. And it was this concept that I grew up on a farm. I grew up on a 200-acre apple orchard. as a kid. My dad was the manager of this like farm entertainment business. It was about an hour south of St. Louis, Missouri, called Eckert's Orchards. And it was a place where people would come and pick their own fruit. And, you know, I was in charge of the petting zoo, you know, and taking care of things. So I loved raising little chicks and everything as a kid. So it was always kind of in my blood. And I always told my dad as a kid, I was like, I just love, you know, this idea of being tied and connected to the land, and I want to be a farmer myself, and, you know, how can I do that? And he said, well, you have to be a doctor first, you know, it was kind of his thing, because he didn't own any land, right. You know, he was, I think, making $12,000 a year supporting 5 kids, and it really wasn't something where we were going to have a large inheritance of land to get it. But that concept was that I wanted to do that.
In the artificial world, if it becomes too distant from creation, 2 things can happen. One, it can actually sever us from experience of reality. And man learns through his senses. As St. Thomas Aquinas tells us, to be man means to learn through our senses. That is how we come to know the truth. Truth is immaterial, but we come to know the truth of things through the material world. To not encounter the material world is dangerous precisely because God intends us and has designed us to learn about Him from the world that He created. Therefore, we might take things out of the world and they become human culture, and we put them to human use. And that's good, but there is a certain remoteness when that happens. And if our culture becomes so remote to sever our experience from reality, then what is artificial in our culture becomes all we actually know, so that we're never able to look past it, to experience anything past it, and to actually experience God and His presence and what He wants to teach us in creation itself. And the great Saint Bernard of Clairvaux said, before you read the book of God, you have to read the book of nature. If we live in a totally artificial world, we will not experience things that God intends us to experience through our senses, so that we can come to a greater knowledge of truth. How do you feel when doing this work? What's your sense of the way we understand that the fact that things die so that we can live? And are you callous and uncaring about animals? I mean, you're just slaughtering them all day?
I wouldn't say I'm callous or uncaring. I raise my own animals, and I intend to eat many of those animals that I raise. I think that actually knowing that I'm going to kill the animal gives me a desire to care for it all the better, because ultimately that animal is going to be eaten by me, and if I care for myself, then I want that animal to be of the highest quality if it's going to come into my body. Mm-hmm. And I think we could say that the animal's highest end would be to feed me and my family, and it's sort of elevated by becoming a part of me. It's no longer just an animal, but now I've consumed it. It's feeding my body, helping me rebuild cells and whatever else my body is doing. And so thinking about it in those terms helps me to have maybe a deeper respect for the animals than someone who's distanced from the process of how an animal goes from a living creature to a steak in a package.
The second way that artificiality can become dangerous is that because we're living in a world that is totally created by man, we can begin to believe things that are completely dislodged from reality. The philosopher Joseph Pieper said that those that are severed from reality, that don't have an experience of real things, that don't know how to taste, how to feel, how to touch in the real world, that they actually can become indifferent or hostile to truth, to where they constantly live in an artificial world, and the passing senses of that artificial world keeps them just sort of amused and distant from reality, where they never gain the depth of thought which leads to prayer, which leads to God. So the second reason that artificiality can be so dangerous, the first reason being that it removes us from creation and the lessons, the second one is that it can lead more easily to sin. Because when we're living in accord with creation, we're living as God intended us to live. He wants us to live in this world in harmony with nature itself, with each other, with Him. These are the relationships that He created. When we are severed from those relationships and we live in a world only of man, well, then we get to experience the only thing on earth that man is the unique creator of, which is sin and error and lies and murder and everything that is not true, that is not good, and that is not beautiful.
Really good, getting all the bugs. And so this is going to be all shaded with fruit dripping.
It sounds like you grew up on the land. You had time away as you were just going to school.
Yes.
Was it having a family that made you want to get back to the farm more?
Yeah, because that is something that when you're providing, right, God instills us as fathers, as husbands to be providers. How are we going to provide? And I wasn't really, I kind of felt that I wasn't buying into this whole idea of like the artificial economy idea. My dad had always instilled this idea of bartering and community and trading and things. And so I knew that to do so, to be a provider, wasn't just about going and being a breadwinner and going off and getting money and exchanging it. It was about viscerally providing for my family. And that's something that I think is in the heart of every man. That's the reason why farming is often something that men want to do, to go out and provide for our families, to literally put food on the table. And so that's something that is just integrated into a holistic life for me. It just kind of all made sense.
My experience has been that men want to farm and they want to have a homestead so that they can work with their family and so that they can put food on the table.
Yes.
And that women very often come from that as they have children, they want to give them the best food possible. And they want to see where it came from. And it's interesting on the homestead, you can't, kill a deer and slap a dead carcass on the table, right? She is, there's this completion of something in the meal that we all have that the motivation seems to be different, but it seems to be consistent with men. I think you're right, that they want to work with their family and they want to bring something directly from the earth, feeling the providence of God, and let their family feel the providence, in a sense, from the father of the family, as we feel it from the Father. So Catholic homesteaders, one of the things that they're trying to get to is, yes, they are trying to escape some things, which is artificiality. But actually they are going outside into the real world to have an encounter with creation so that they can have an encounter with God.
It is complicated here. There's a lot to do. There's always something new to learn and do, especially if you haven't grown up with it. So that makes it complicated, but at the same time, there are times that one of my sows will be giving birth, and I'll grab Gregory and we'll just sit outside the pen and just watch for a couple hours. And I don't feel like, I couldn't do that if I was working, for the companies I used to work for. I couldn't say, well, I'm just gonna sit here for 2 hours, just do nothing and contemplate my place in life, nature, God. But Gregory and I can do that. We can sit there and watch those pigs being born, and this is why I'm here, so I can do this. I mean, it's not the sole reason, but it's the reason. It's one of the reasons why it makes it a simpler life, because you can take the time, and they say smell the roses. You can take the time to smell the roses, even though you're very busy.
So the reason so many Catholics want to move to homesteading is not because they want to escape something, but because they want to encounter reality again in creation, because that is where there are certain lessons that we need to learn from God, and there is not another way to learn them.